installation of the work. Joe, in his screenshots from the performances, you actually would have seen a lot of the work from Ione up in the top left quadrant of those videos. Just really strong images, often black and white, very much about creating meaning from this story that she didn't have immediate access to as a secret society. So Honeypot, I'm certainly very interested to know a lot of things, but I'm wondering about, as an invitation, which this work feels like it's full of invitation, how did you start making work? How did the exhibition inspire the process or the thinking or the structure around the work? And if that's too big of a question to start with, maybe just outline what the structure of the work is, because it's clear that there's a process involved that you all undertake, and we're seeing the end result of that process played out in an exploration that you have.
Yeah, I was just going back in my memory bank to remember how we, like, I think it was just all really felicitous, really, you know, like we knew that we were gonna, I think we had decided to do this project, that we knew we wanted to do something this year, working with other artists and to examine kind of connections to spirit, ancestors, and intuitive choices, you know, as part of a core of how we, like, you know, make work and what excites us about it. And then you came to me, John, with like, there's this cool, you know, exhibition we're gonna do, and maybe there's a way that we could work together. And just I think the themes of, you know, Belkis and her work and her life story, it was a real alignment in terms of looking at spirit practice, and even like her skepticism, even as she's like, you know, like doing this work, you know, I think there's something about that that relates to like us unpacking like how spirit, taking a step back from like where, you know, we're a spirit in this, and how are we setting things up to make these decisions to let other things guide us. I don't know. Jen, you want to talk some about the scoring process, like, and how we came up with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, one of the important spaces to start is with engaging with the work. So having the opportunity to be in presence of it and get close and fully engage with the textures and the subjects that started to give way to all of the themes that would reveal themselves. And similarly with reflecting on the articles that had been written posthumously, again, about her, those key concepts started to, again, show up. So those small elements we wanted to hold on to, so that can be a way to link the two together. So as the process built, we were using many of those themes that continue to pull up as the prompts or the particular parts of the score that we have access to. And the work of divining, I think that it happens in life anyway. It is something that naturally happens. So honoring that process within the building of the work began to be the core of it. And so finding a way for us to structure not only the space and how do we honor that process of getting information. So being cognizant of being able to have a space that everyone can kind of come to, that can be easily duplicated, that can be easily engaged with. And building that format, it happened in a uh, uh, it was a lovely evening. But Maida, I remember that was when we first got the like there was a text or a mass message about kind of this shelter in place. So it was interesting, the timing of it all and how the interweaving showed itself even on the other end. But that was kind of the heart of like the root of how then the process started to build itself and build itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Jennifer, I think it was in your blog post that you had recently where you were talking about how you realized the importance of coming up with a good question. And I think that has to do with the process of divination as well, that in this creation of the structure, there was actually it seems like there was some kind of a learning curve where you learn to be better at divining through the process. Did I interpret that correctly, or could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, we need to know exactly what we're asking. So in order for us to move forward, even in the part of the building, I know there were moments where I didn't feel I could even move on until I had asked properly the question at hand. But yes, I feel like clarity is very important.
You also bring up the reality that this work is being created in a very challenging time where we can't be together. And one of the responses that I have to the work, which I mentioned earlier, is a sense of intimacy, that I'm drawn into this space. And part of that is because we don't get to be together. We don't get to be in a physical space. And there was so much heart and attention to creating architecture from my perspective of watching the work. Each section has its own tones. I can't say that it has a theme, although I'm reading theme into it. I think the audience becomes really important. And also the frame that we see it in, like in the first movement, the way that the bodies are broken in the frame is really amazing to see and respond to. And at the same time, there's this score of water, and it has this lightness and flow to it. And then the second movement starts with such a feeling of affirmation, and it has this jazz that seems to be underlying the beginning of it. Could folks talk about maybe a little bit about how the circumstances of making work right now and this notion of framing and how you're using sound? Perhaps Norman and Joe, you could talk about that.
It's difficult on a lot of levels. For me, as a DJ, and you go in to set up in the space, you're mindful of the space, and then you're mindful of how people will hear it. You're always looking at the crowd. You're always looking to see the reaction. It's a give and take. At the beginning of this, it was hard because it's a lot of setup that you have to do in the back. There's a lot of movement. We was doing it live. We was at the reunion, and recording and watching, and then playing instruments, and and trying to feel and see what you want to do next. That was kind of difficult, and so I learned to just sit for a couple of minutes and just listen. In this space is also the other layer. Now that we are on virtual, I don't know how well you were hearing me now. And that kills me. You know, it drives me nuts. Like, is my voice sounding okay? Is everyone's at a certain level? And then the recording of it. You know, you can't go back and say, okay, let me change whatever. It's one audio, one video file. So that part, it was difficult to not being able to manipulate and do what I like to do with it during it and afterwards. But in this environment and what's happening with Rona right now, um, it's been a pleasure. It's been such a relief to have these moments where we can gather virtually even, and it's kind of melted away. You know, at first you plugging up your computer, but like now is the communication, you know, it just melts away. And then it just take you to a point where you can then listen and feed off what's given to you and play and, you know, and draw from that. Um, and I guess the good thing for me is that I'm home with all my, you know, music here versus being out, and I only have to take a selection with me and improv off of that. But it was kind of difficult just trying to hear and make sure the sounds, you know, because you're dealing with Zoom as well, because Zoom will highlight whoever's talking, so the sound goes in and out. You know, and there's some wonderful things that were happening, you know, during that. I wish we could have caught it all, but even then, looking at Aisha saying it, you know, vocalizing that, and Sojourner when she was on the stairs and having this conversation, you know, it was really powerful. Even though some of the words wasn't there, just the movement and expression of the body, and seeing that, I was able to draw from that. And it's funny how it spills over to the next movement and just kept going. That's how it worked for me. You know, it's like, okay, first I had to feel everyone and then try to bring it into to support, you know, what's happening, you know, on the video wise. And yeah, I was doing a lot also with Norman. I'm sorry, I'm pointing to the side. I'm looking at the monitor here, but I was feeding a lot off of Norman because I understood the dynamics that was happening with Zoom, you know, with the audio. So I didn't want to clash too much, you know, and I wanted everyone to be heard. Yeah.
I sort of agree with a lot of so like most of the views that Joe had talked about. I was really I think the biggest challenge was technology, new technology for me. Um, I'm working with a new setup at home, and also the setup that we have at that that we work with through the Zoom meeting, and um, that was something I had to adjust to. Um, what was interesting and what was fun was gathering like my resources, um, and because I use synths and samples, being able to like draw from what I've been collecting, doing field recordings, or you know finding samples or whatever, and adding that to the score and trying to fit that in, and then listening and watching to everyone. It was almost like it was almost like it's like an information overload.
Mhm.
It was just so much, and I think that was a really interesting challenge to actually listen, watch, and see how you could contribute within the score.
Mm.
That's that was that was a lot of fun. A lot of people I work with, you know, we don't really use scores. So it's in we so it's so that was a extra challenge too. So I appreciated the limitations, but it's also frustrating because um, you know, hearing what I heard yesterday and then hearing it over through here, um, there was really good parts. I was, you know, I was like, ah, man, I sound terrible, but you know, if I was looking compared to, you know, looking at what everybody else was doing was great. Actually having to see and having to sit and trying not to get frustrated with my own performance or whatever, but seeing how everybody else was reacting to the prompts and to the score was um, really fun, and it's actually is very intimate, and I hope we can all do this in person.
Yeah,
Kind
yeah. I was thinking the
of,
same thing because it was so many times. It was a lot of times when it looked like the hallway. I think that was in the third movement with Jen and Sojourner on the Stairs, and someone else was in the hall. Like, I don't, was that Kamiko? You know, it just felt like if they were together, if we was in one room, it was like they were all together in that hall. You know, they were all doing kind of like the same thing.
yeah.
I
And
love.
I was like, wow, so, you know, it's, and I don't know if they was watching each other, you know, feeling from that, but it was, I don't know, it just felt like it was so much going on, and we was trying to make sure all the parts had something to feed from, you know, and try not to clash, but just try to enhance and you know, not to overmine but to undermine. You know, yeah, it was pretty cool. Thanks for the question, John.
Yeah, well, it's clear that there was a lot of patience and careful listening that was being done amongst all of you. And Maid at the beginning was talking about how it's slow. You know, it was. I heard it as kind of a Maida when you said it. Just, you know, know that it's going to be slow, and that, you know, just let yourself kind of be absorbed by it, which is a great indication to get into the piece, because there's actually so much about sensation, and it's so quiet. And, you know, the first movement has this text that, you know, the text obviously, for me anyways, becomes an anchor throughout. So it's clearly not describing what's happening, but when I hear listen, I'm aware of sensation. And I think the other movements had similar connections to other senses. And it was just this really great kind of uh, reality to know that all of the senses are present, even touch, as everyone's moving through the environment. You know, Joe was talking about Sojourner moving up those stairs, and it was so strong to have everybody in a different room for each movement, because it really created a process that the work goes through, from perhaps more emotional themes that I'm responding to in the first two movements, to senses of labor and also identity and family. You know, these things are throughout, but then they really surface at the end. And I feel like I'm coming to the end of a journey by being in these very real rooms. You know, Maida's folding laundry, and then dancing with her dresser, you know? So it's like all the worlds are colliding by the end. And I'm wondering a little bit, you know, with this being a work in progress, and experimentation and improv, and some of the thoughts about the challenges of it. And Joe, you're talking about wanting to see people together in like a trio because they're doing similar things. How does this start to inform the practice and help you migrate to the real world again?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like I'm looking forward to this idea of like commissioning, each of these artists to go off and take, like we've recorded all of these sessions, so everybody will have access to the archive. I think that one of the cool things about Zoom is that you can pull the audio track. So I think we'll have material that people can work with in a different kind of way. Like you can pull the images, the moving video, and you can use some of that material, but you could also just take some of the audio and slice that up and do other things with it. Or take stuff, and if you're doing live vocals. So I feel like we are generating all of this incredible storehouse of material that then we can, break up and see what each of these artists is gonna do with it, as they make something that's intentional out of all of this information. I think we also, there's an idea to actually, like, that the weekend would be like, 2 or 3 nights of like these new works, but then there would also be a night that would just be scores, and that we would somehow put together all of these scores or take from them and do one evening event that is just improvisational based off of these scores, but live. So I look forward to the possibility of that, or even if we can't get fully live or like fully close to each other, even if we have to like figure out proximity, I feel like maybe by the end of this year we'll figure out something where we could at least be in a space together somehow, even if we can't touch, so I don't know, those are my kind of thoughts on that right now. I don't know if others have.
I definitely want to open it up to others too.
Well, I know that part of the experience and part of the work of improvisation is trust and presence, primarily presence, and then secondarily trust for myself. And it's interesting, while it's interesting to interpret presence and trust virtually, what I'm looking forward to is, again, this first stage has generated such a wealth of material, not only an actual archive, but actual personal space memory. So Michael Jackson said, "Get off the Zoom and dance." I'm definitely looking forward to being able to gather this material and look through it again and find a way to get together and see what it looks like in this post Corona world.
Yeah. I'll note one other thing, that this has made me think a lot about, like staging, because I think there's been some shifting now, like where a lot of us are now, like when we're doing the scores, we like shift spaces over the course of the 3 movements, because we try to discover new places to move or make in, because it also affects how you can move, right? If I set up, in this corner here, and I know, my frame, I have this small space I can move in. If I come, I'm very aware now with Zoom and doing this, that like, I can change what the movement looks like by just like, proximity, and there's a lot of playing with that, which I think is really fun, to kind of like cut your head off and just see the, parts of a body, or like the shoulder, or this is enabling some of that in a way that, and I wonder about like taking that feeling and trying to translate that back into liveness,
Yeah, it certainly looks like you're having fun and being thoughtful, and everybody's personality comes out. Really loved watching Sojourner be so close to the cameras and having this very alive face that for me, because I'm familiar also with the work on exhibition, reminded me of the faces of Vion's collagraphs. But also the kind of focus in everyone's work, and in the last movement, the exterior, and then this kind of tented space, and so playful, and beyond earnest, but at the same time with all of the texture and the grit of life and experience. So I commend you all for just making space to build this together, and I'm so glad that we found a way to put it out in the world as it is these days. So I just want to thank you again for making time and putting this out there tonight for people to enjoy, and certainly I was one of them, and I'm a big fan to see what happens next.